Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. House Republicans nominate Congressman Steve Scalise for House Speaker, but the second-place finisher in the secret ballot, Congressman Jim Jordan, received almost as many votes. And since it takes to be elected Speaker the votes of an absolute majority of House members, not just Republicans, a House floor vote has yet to take place. Coming up, we hear from Steve Scalise and both Republicans who plan to vote for him on the House floor and one who's not quite ready to do that, and we'll speak with The Hill's House reporter Emily Brooks. President Joe Biden says his administration continues to monitor the war between Israel and the Palestinian group Hamas, now in its fifth day, and that the U.S. continues to stand with Israel. The president also joining Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, who is Jewish, at a roundtable in Washington with Jewish community leaders. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown, attend a NATO meeting in Brussels dealing with support for Ukraine in its war with Russia, but now also focused on Israel and Hamas. And the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, is at the IMF World Bank meetings in Morocco, saying that further sanctions on Iran, which some say is behind Hamas's attack, are still on the table. Also today, the latest on the newest fraud and corruption indictments against Republican Congressman George Santos, and President Biden takes more steps to stop what he calls junk fees, the misleading or hidden charges on goods and services. And now to the House Republicans nominating Congressman Steve Scalise, the current majority leader, Republican from Louisiana, to be the next speaker. In a secret ballot vote, he received 113 votes. Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, the current Judiciary Committee chair, got 99 votes. There were 8 votes for other candidates for Speaker, and 3 Republican members voted present. The Washington Post puts it this way: the Republican-led House recessed Wednesday without voting on House Majority Leader Steve Scalise as Speaker. It's unclear how long the recess might last. Congressman Scalise narrowly won his party's nomination earlier Wednesday in a race that also included Congressman Jim Jordan. The delay in a vote by the full House signals that Congressman Scalise is still working to win support of Congressman Jordan backers. Becoming Speaker requires a majority vote in the full, narrowly divided House. That was from the Washington Post. Congressman Scalise spoke to reporters after the private meeting and balloting.
First, I want to thank my House Republican colleagues for just designating me as the Speaker. Obviously, we still have work to do. We're going to have to go upstairs on the House floor and resolve this and then get the House opened again. We have a lot of work to do, not just in the House for the people of this country, but we see how dangerous of a world it is and how things can change so quickly. We need to make sure we're sending a message to people all throughout the world that the House is open and doing the people's business, making sure that we're unequivocally standing in our first resolution that we pass under Speaker Steve Scalise will be to make it clear that we stand with Israel. The McCall-Meeks resolution will be our first order of business. But obviously there's a lot more work to do. The conversations we've been having with my colleagues over the last few days leading up to this show that there's a resolve, that we need to get back to work. There's a lot of business to take care of. Families are struggling across this country. You know, we passed a lot of legislation to help families get back on track, to address our border crisis, to get our economy moving again, to address the spending in Washington that's driving inflation, high energy costs. All of those bills that we've passed and that we're going to continue to pass that are sitting over in the Senate need to be taken up. We've passed over 70% of the bills to fund the government, dealing with appropriations and setting the priorities of this nation's spending, and the Senate has taken up 0. The Senate has to start doing their work. And by the way, in that legislation, including the State and Foreign Ops Bill, the Defense Appropriations Bill, includes funding for Israel, things like Iron Dome, precision-guided missiles, things that could be used today to help them in this war. So there is a lot to do. I'm also going to be calling on President Biden to sit down and talk about the crisis at the border. As we have an open southern border, and we've seen millions come in the last few years, including people on the terrorist watch list from all over the world. If he doesn't know now, after what happened, we cannot have an unsecure border. We've got to secure America's border. We've passed legislation to do that. It's time we sit down and have a conversation about how to secure America's border. And it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. There are Democrat mayors all over the country who've been calling on the president to do this too. That's a conversation we need to have today. There's a lot of busy work to do, a lot of important work to do on behalf of people who are struggling, not only here in America, but who are concerned all around the world. And we're going to provide that vision. We have a lot of work to do. Obviously, I've got some more conversations.
You don't have the floor votes. It's true, you don't have the floor votes, but you run the second ballot.
Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, the current majority leader and nominated today by his party for Speaker. Speaking with reporters, he got 113 votes in that balloting, but the person who came in second place, Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, got 99 votes. Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, who had led the effort to remove former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, said that he supports Steve Scalise for Speaker.
I'm excited for him. Can't wait to go vote for Steve Scalise. Absolutely. Long live Speaker Scalise.
Do you think he has the votes on the floor? He was a divided vote in there.
I sure hope so. We'll see some democracy in action.
That's Congressman Matt Gaetz speaking with reporters. Having the votes on the floor means that he needs an absolute majority on the House floor in order to be elected Speaker, and assuming that the Democrats will vote for their nominee, Hakeem Jeffries, the current minority leader, he would need, that is, Steve Scalise would need 217 votes from Republicans. Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, told reporters today that he supported Jim Jordan on that first ballot, but now that Steve Scalise is the nominee, he would vote for him on the House floor.
Now that it is Scalise who's Speaker-elect, what do you plan to do on the floor?
I voted for Jordan, but with Scalise won outright, I'll vote for Scalise. It's time to have a speaker.
Do you think that the conference can get behind Scalise today? It was a pretty divided vote there.
We'll see. It's close, but I think I know what I'm going to do.
Did Mr. Jordan do anything to sort of unify ranks in there? Did Scalise and Jordan do anything that was a push for unity?
Yeah, both of them said unity. That's one of the main focuses that they will have, both of them. And I think both of them will work for that.
Did Mr. Jordan be the majority leader? Is that the idea?
No, we didn't get into that.
Did Jordan say he will vote for Scalise after it was announced?
He said whoever got 217 on the floor.
Jordan said that after the vote was announced?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not unifying.
No, but my commitment when whoever won in there, I was going to vote for the winner. It's time to have a speaker.
Will Jordan's other supporters?
We'll see.
How many companies got a shutdown?
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, speaking to reporters after the House Republican Conference meeting and the vote for Speaker within that conference. Troy Nehls is a Republican from Texas. He says he also supported Congressman Jordan on that ballot, that first ballot, but he's not ready yet to switch to the person who won that ballot, Steve Scalise.
Who did you vote for in there?
Jim Jordan.
And now that Steve Scalise is Speaker-elect, what do you plan to do on the floor?
Well, I don't know. We got to see if it's going to go to the floor. Did somebody tell you it's going to the floor today?
I heard potentially 3 o'clock.
Potentially, it'll be interesting. Steve Scalise got 113 votes. That is a majority. But how are you going to convince the other 100 and something of a sudden just say, well, now we're all going to vote for Steve Scalise? I think Steve Scalise is a great guy, but he got 51% of the conference. So my point is this. If we're going to take this floor to the vote, or this vote to the floor, I hope you try to get everybody together and figure out how you're going to get all the others to say, okay, Steve's the guy.
What do you need to hear from Scalise to vote for him on the floor?
I'm sorry?
What do you need to hear from Scalise? What can you do to convince him to get your
Listen,
vote?
Steve Scalise is a great leader. He became the whip. He became the majority leader. He's been here a long time. I think he's a hell of a nice guy. I think he's very, very effective. And I feel certain he'll do a great job as Speaker as well. I have nothing against Steve Scalise. I was just more on the Jordan side. I'm more of, that Freedom Caucus guy, and that's who Donald Trump wanted.
What do you think that means that Donald Trump endorsed Jim Jordan did not win?
Well, you got some people in the conference that obviously have some issues with Donald Trump, but I would probably say to those in the Republican conference that have problems with Donald Trump, get over yourself, because Donald Trump's the leader of our party. Make no mistake.
Congressman Troy Nehls, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters today. Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill, has been tracking the race to elect a new speaker and joins us now from Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. Congressman Scalise gets nominated by the House Republicans over Congressman Jordan, but no House floor vote yet. When might that happen, and what has to happen to get to that point?
Well, right now, there are still a handful of members who are saying that even though Scalise won their internal Republican nomination, they will not vote for him on the floor. They're still saying that they are going to vote for Representative Jim Jordan. Some of them are saying they are undecided. They're waiting to see if they can get more answers about some of the issues that pushed McCarthy out of the speakership, like on spending. And at least one member, Representative Carlos Jimenez of Florida, said that he is still planning to vote for McCarthy on the floor. So between all of that, with Republicans having just a slim 4-seat majority, it doesn't look like they have the votes locked up yet, and they do not want to go all of these rounds of voting again. So the members are meeting in the Speaker's office with Scalise and I believe Jordan. And so far, we're not seeing a whole lot of movement. Representative Boebert just left not too long ago, and she appeared unmoved by those conversations.
You said that Congressman Jordan is actually in that meeting. What's his position now?
Well, I am hearing from a source with direct knowledge that Representative Jordan is encouraging members to vote for Scalise on the floor, and that he is actually offered to make a nominating speech for Scalise on the floor. So that is a pretty strong show of goodwill and support for him, and hopefully to unify the conference, but they're not quite taking him up on that yet.
Out of the 99 members who voted for Congressman Jordan, is there a sense of how many holdouts there are?
Well, right now things are evolving quickly, so we are tracking a handful. We have at least 5 members who are saying they're going to support another candidate, probably around another 4 to 5 who are undecided or just not yet explicitly backing Scalise as they look for other answers on that. And there are some people that we haven't heard from yet who we are not sure of. Some of those people who we're not sure of are members like Representative Eli Crane of Arizona, I don't believe has weighed in. And however, we have heard from some of those members who voted to oust McCarthy who are supporting Scalise on the floor. Those include Representative Matt Gaetz, who made that motion to vacate, Representative Matt Rosendale of Montana, and Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
There was an effort to change the rules to try to avoid this situation and require that in order to be nominated by House Republicans, you would actually need an absolute majority of the House. Tell us what happened with that motion in the House Republican meeting this morning.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting idea. It would have kicked off a sort of complicated process to where if a candidate got a majority of the Republican conference, they would go in rounds, having members vote again, first on a private ballot and then eventually with a roll call vote out loud, revealing their votes to each other about whether they could support that nominee, that potential nominee, that leader that had the majority support of the conference until that person could secure 217 votes, unless they went so many rounds and they still could not get there. Then the whole process would have restarted again. And even though there were 100 members, over 100 members who had signed a letter asking for a special conference in order to consider this kind of rule change, it did not even get 100 votes in support because it was tabled. It was there was a motion to table. Less than 100 members voted against tabling this motion as there were concerns about whether this would just empower some of those people who are going to not support somebody who was someone other than Jim Jordan, or just not somebody that they did not want no matter what. And so that after that was killed, then the members went directly into their nominating speeches for the two candidates.
We're talking with Emily Brooks, a House reporter for The Hill. There was a lot of talk about changing the motion to vacate rule, which allowed one member, Congressman Gates, to oust the previous speaker. Have we heard how that might be altered?
Yeah, so there is no set decision yet about how to change the motion to vacate rule. I will say that both of the candidates for Speaker, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, did express that if it were to be changed, that they would want to have that decided first within the House Republican Conference to get consensus and unity on that before having to change it on the House floor, just so that it wouldn't come to a situation to where more Democrats supported a change than Republicans, something that has really become an issue plaguing the Republican conference and causing a lot of heartburn in the right flank, as there have been some spending measures that have passed with more Republican votes with more Democratic votes than Republican votes, or relying on Democrats in order to get something like a stopgap measure to avert a government shutdown passed. So whether they could get that support and what exactly that means, would that mean unanimous support for changing it in the conference? Who knows? But there are some members who say that it should stay where it is, and it was a major issue for Kevin McCarthy in his speakership race, and he was pressured to lower it down to just one member. So it's hard to see exactly where this could go if those hardline members would allow that change.
Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill. You can read her stories at thehill.com and on X, formerly Twitter, at Emily Brooks News. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Washington Today. House Democrats met Tuesday to nominate for Speaker unanimously their current House Democratic Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. House Democrats held another caucus meeting today, and after the Democratic caucus chair, Pete Aguilar of California, led a news conference, he was asked whether he prefers Republican Steve Scalise or Republican Jim Jordan to be elected Speaker.
Okay. Between Scalise and Jordan, do Democrats see one being a better negotiating partner over the other?
It's up to Republicans to pick their leader. I can tell you that I think some of us have friendly conversations with Steve Scalise occasionally. I think he's viewed as a more affable and member that we can have conversations with. I personally think, from my perspective as a member of the January 6th committee, that Jim Jordan is dangerous to our democracy. I've said that before. His inability to answer questions related to a lawful subpoena poses, I think, institutional concerns. But this is something that Republicans are going to have to worry about. One thing I am confident is that Hakeem Jeffries will have the votes of the Democratic caucus when we are asked to nominate the next speaker.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the Democratic caucus chair at a news conference today, stayed with the C-SPAN networks as the race for House Speaker continues. Associated Press summarizing things today. Republicans nominated Congressman Steve Scalise on Wednesday to be the next House Speaker, but struggled to quickly unite their deeply divided majority and elect the conservative in a public floor vote after ousting Congressman Kevin McCarthy from the job. Now to the war between Israel and Hamas. CNN writes that Israel has formed an emergency government and war management cabinet. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and National Unity Party leader Benny Gantz jointly announced Wednesday in the wake of Hamas's surprise attacks on border communities that killed at least 1,200 people and injured thousands more. The government will not pass any laws or make any decisions that do not concern the conduct of war, the announcement said. Israel has stepped up its offensive in Gaza following Hamas's October 7th onslaught. That's how CNN wrote it. In Washington, D.C., President Biden said he spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel for the fourth time since the fighting began.
We continue to monitor the situation in Israel very closely, and the Vice President and I and the Buckle My security team spoke with the Prime Minister Netanyahu again this morning, and I'll be speaking about this afternoon during my meeting with the Jewish American leaders. This attack has brought to the surface the painful memories and scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide against the Jewish people. And this moment, we have to be crystal clear. There is no justification for terrorism, no excuse, and the type of terrorism that was exhibited here was just beyond the pale, beyond the pale. As I said yesterday, my commitment to Israel's security and the safety of the Jewish people is unshakable. The United States has Israel's back, and we're going to be working on this all through today and beyond. But again, I apologize for keeping you waiting.
President Biden in the White House Rose Garden at the start of an event on a different issue. Later, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that so far 22 Americans have been confirmed killed in the fighting between Israel and Hamas, and 17 Americans remain unaccounted for. Israeli Defense Forces say that overall, as of this morning, at least 1,200 Israelis have been killed, more than 2,700 injured. And in Gaza, more than 1,000 people have been killed and 5,000 injured, according to the health ministries of Gaza and the West Bank. President Biden said he would be attending a roundtable with Jewish community leaders later in the day that was held in the Eisenhower Executive Office building right next to the White House, and introducing the president, the Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, who is Jewish.
I'm going to start by just saying the Vice President and I are outraged at these horrific terrorist attacks in Israel perpetrated by Hamas. We are outraged. With our broken hearts, we are sending our love, our strength, and our unwavering support to the people of Israel. I'm honored to be with all of you today as an American, as a patriot who loves this country, but also as a Jew. And like all Jews, I feel a deep, visceral connection to Israel and its people. We witnessed a mass murder of innocent civilians. It was a terrorist assault. There is never any justification for terrorism. There are no two sides to this issue. The images that we saw will be seared in our brains forever. Rockets falling on cities, people dragged from their homes and shot dead, children sheltering from bullets, bodies lining the streets. And all the while, we see videos of these terrorists cheering on these atrocities. The toll on Israel and the Jewish community is hard to imagine, but we can imagine it because it's happening. And I know many of you have sent texts and calls this weekend checking on loved ones. And I know too many of you received heartbreaking replies. And we know today that at least 22 Americans won't be coming home. I know you're all hurting. The entire Jewish community is hurting. I'm hurting. And we grieve with you. We stand with you. But thank God we have the steady leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris during this unthinkable time in our history. Their moral compass, their calm, their empathy are what we need in this time of crisis. And we saw that yesterday when President Biden, with Vice President Harris and Secretary Blinken by his side, powerfully addressed the nation and made clear to the world that Israel has the United States' unwavering support. Our president and vice president are making sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself. We are grateful for their leadership and support for Israel at this exceptionally difficult time. We also acknowledge and address how these events will impact us as Jews, and why we're here to have this discussion. And I know many of us feel a deep fear that these attacks will, unfortunately, and already have, led to a rise in hate and anti-Semitism. We're already seeing it. And that's why this discussion and the work you and your organizations do is so vitally important.
The Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff at the start of a roundtable discussion with the leaders of the Jewish community held in the Eisenhower Executive Office building next to the White House, a meeting that also included President Biden. An article by Stars and Stripes. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced Wednesday that the U.S. will send another $200 million in new weaponry to Ukraine, while also signaling that the Pentagon was gearing up to support Israel in its war against Hamas. Secretary Austin, during a meeting of allied and partner defense chiefs at NATO headquarters in Brussels, said the new security package for Ukraine includes munitions for a new air defense system, artillery, anti-tank, and anti-drone weapons. Secretary Austin, flanked by Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Charles Q. Brown and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said U.S. support for Israel's security will remain ironclad. That from Stars and Stripes. Defense Secretary Austin and General Brown held a joint news conference. Here's the Secretary on the war in the Middle East.
Hamas deliberately targeted civilians and massacred them just because they are Jews. Hamas has again killed innocent Americans and civilians from many other countries, and Hamas has abducted entirely innocent civilians. So the United States continues to stand firm with Israel and the Israeli people. The USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group has now arrived in the eastern Mediterranean. We've also moved to extend U.S. Air Force fighter squadrons in the region, and the Department of Defense stands fully ready to deploy additional assets if necessary. As President Biden has said, for any country, for any organization, for anyone thinking about trying to take advantage of the agony in Israel, to try to widen this conflict or to try to spill more blood, we have just one word: don't. Additional U.S. military aid to Israel started flowing in yesterday, including key munitions. And we'll be providing more Iron Dome interceptors so that Israel can protect its citizens and cities. And we'll continue to ensure that Israel has what it needs to keep itself and its citizens safe. And like any other country, Israel has the right to defend itself. As the President says, Israel has a duty to defend itself. And make no mistake, the United States will remain able to project power and to direct resources to tackle crises in multiple theaters. So we will stand firmly with Israel as we continue to support Ukraine.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. Standing with him, General Charles Q. Brown, on his first trip there as the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The main purpose of the meeting was Russia's war in Ukraine. It was a gathering of the 50-plus nations in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and General Brown was asked to assess Ukraine's military situation.
So this is my first opportunity to meet with with President Zelensky, but I've also had a chance to talk, and at least listen to the phone calls with General Zelensky, and also over the course of the past week that I've been in the job, get updates from the Joint Staff and our intel team. And so today, to be able to listen to President Zelensky and be able to have, as Secretary Austin asked specific questions about their overall objectives, where his real concerns were, I have a better appreciation, more so today than I had when I walked in this morning, on where Ukraine is headed and where they want to go. I think after hearing this morning, but then also listening later this afternoon to all the contributions by each of the nations, I do feel we're putting Ukraine in a good spot. I realize during the winter months it gets more challenging, but Ukraine has intent to continue their offensive operations throughout the winter months. And I do believe, based on what I heard today from each of the nations, we're doing all the right things to posture them to be successful.
General Charles C.Q. Brown, chair of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. New York Times writes that top NATO officials sought to reassure President Zelensky, pledging more than $2 billion in additional military aid to be delivered before Ukraine's winter sets in. But Mr. Zelensky later said that, of course, everybody's afraid that Western assistance would dwindle as the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza continues. And since Hamas's attack on Israel last weekend, there's been some speculation about Iran's involvement in planning it. And there have been calls in the U.S., especially among Republican elected officials, but some Democrats as well, to revisit the $6 billion in Iranian oil revenue that was unfrozen as part of a prisoner swap. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was asked about it today during a news conference at the IMF World Bank meetings in Marrakesh, Morocco.
To what extent is the U.S. looking to tighten the enforcement of oil sanctions on Iran in light of the Hamas attacks? And are there other avenues the administration is considering to make it harder for terrorist organizations like Hamas to access financing?
Well, we have not in any way relaxed our sanctions on Iranian oil. And we have sanctions on Hamas, on Hezbollah. This is something we have been constantly looking at and using information that comes available to tighten sanctions. We will continue to do that. So I don't have anything new to announce, just that these are areas we have long recognized are deserving of constant attention with respect to our sanctions, and we've been vigilant about that.
Andy Duran with the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Secretary Yellen. Just on that point, though, there's been a lot of attention drawn to the $6 billion in Iranian oil proceeds that have been unfrozen under, obviously, specific terms. If the U.S. government finds that Iran was, directly involved in this attack by Hamas, would that money be refrozen potentially, or just what's the outlook on those funds in particular going forward?
Well, these are funds that are sitting in Qatar that were made available purely for humanitarian purposes, and the funds have not been touched. I wouldn't take anything off the table in terms of future possible actions, but I certainly don't want to get ahead of where we are on that.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen at the IMF World Bank meetings in Morocco. From Fox News, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed Tuesday the ongoing violent conflict between Israel and Hamas following the series of terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas. President Putin made the remarks in a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, according to the Moscow Times. President Putin said at the meeting, "I think many will agree with me that this is a clear example of the failure of U.S. policy in the Middle East." President Putin blamed the Hamas terror attacks on U.S. interventionism, claiming the U.S. military regulated and managed tensions between the two territories without concern for the long-term wishes of Palestinians. That from Fox News. More on Israel and Hamas, view from U.S. Congress when Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source. On C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast, wherever you find your podcasts, and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. From the New York Times, 4 U.S. lawmakers met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other government leaders in Israel on Tuesday, in what they described as a show of solidarity after Hamas's surprise attack over the weekend. "We stand shoulder to shoulder so that we can go toe-to-toe with any terrorist going forward," Congressman Jimmy Panetta, Democrat of California, said during a news conference in Israel. "It is from our solidarity that we have our strength." The bipartisan delegation to Israel, comprising 3 representatives and a senator, arrived after lawmakers made stops elsewhere in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. The trip was organized to promote the expansion of recent agreements to normalize relations between Israel and Arab countries. That was from the New York Times. The others on the trip were Senator Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa, and House members Donald Norcross of New Jersey and Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, both Democrats. In Washington today, House members attended a classified briefing on the Israel-Hamas war, and after several Republicans held a news conference, including Congressman Max Miller of Ohio.
As one of just 2 Republicans who are Jewish within this body, and David standing behind me, what we witnessed a few days ago was absolutely horrific. As the chairman just said, babies being beheaded. We took a vote earlier in this Congress to stand against anti-Semitism. I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was because of the gentlelady Jayapal and her comments about Israel, calling it a racist and apartheid state. 9 individuals of this body voted no. Does anyone want to take a guess of what party they were for? That was the Democrat Party. We have a problem within this body. What I want to see out of this administration and President Biden and Democrats and Republicans here, I want to see President Biden go after our allies that we have, like the Qataris, and military relationships that we have, and extradite these Hamas terrorists that we know that they are there. And I would like to see that happen in a very forceful way. And the other thing that I'd like to say is, I would like this administration to get out of Israel's way and to let Israel do what it needs to do best. And in my opinion, we have been measured since 1948, and Israel has been measured since 1948 in their approach. I believe that they need to do what they need to do in order to keep every Israeli safe. And the last thing that I'll say, this isn't just Jewish blood. Israel is a place, it is a functioning democracy. Israel recognizes every religious denomination, race, and creed. These savages not only killed Jewish people, they killed Christian people, they killed Hindu people, and everyone underneath the sun. Make no mistake, they want to end our way of life here in this country as well.
Congressman Max Miller, Republican from Ohio, at a news conference after a classified briefing on the war between Hamas and Israel. He mentioned he was one of 2 Jewish Republicans, and he said that David was the other. It's David Kustoff of Tennessee. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, also Jewish, spoke to reporters this morning outside the House Democratic members' meeting.
Morning, Congressman. Did you go to the briefing this morning?
I was not there for all the briefing. Yeah.
What do you make of the Biden administration's response so far to the terrorist attack in Israel? Do you think that the president has done a good job?
America has been totally unified against this explosion of terrorism against Israel, and President Biden has made it clear that we stand completely behind our allies in Israel against this fanaticism and the death cult, that has overtaken the region, and Israel's going to fight back, and we're going to be with them.
Are you worried that the U.S. won't be able to support Israel financially if the House continues to not have a speaker?
Well, the House needs to have a speaker. I mean, this is just chaos under the Republican mismanagement of the House of Representatives, and we're hopeful that they'll be able to have some clarity about what they want to do today. Right now we have 212 votes for Hakeem Jeffries, who is extremely well organized and efficient and effective, and all we would need is 6 votes from Republicans in order to put Hakeem Jeffries over the House. But if they're not willing to do that, they should figure out what they are doing.
Do you think Democrats are unified in their message that Israel has a right to defend itself? A couple of your colleagues have called for a ceasefire, called for de-escalation, referred to Israel as an apartheid state. Do you think Democrats are unified in their support for Israel?
Yeah, we're absolutely unified behind Israel's right to exist and Israel's right to defend itself, and we'll be standing strong with Israel.
What do you make of the comments from your colleagues that sort of indicate otherwise?
Well, I haven't seen any of those. All that I've heard is a very powerful consensus that we need to stand by Israel as it defends itself and as it restores the rule of law and the security of its citizens and the security and the human rights for everybody in the region.
Thank you, Congressman.
You bet.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, speaking with reporters this morning. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, who caucuses with the Democrats in the Senate, put out a statement today criticizing Israeli forces for cutting off electricity, food, fuel, and water to the more than 2 million residents of Gaza. It says the targeting of civilians is a war crime no matter who does it. Israel's blanket denial of food, water, and other necessities to Gaza is a serious violation of international law and will do nothing but harm innocent civilians. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 65, NASDAQ up 96, S&P up 18. President Biden today said his efforts to crack down on what he called junk fees, according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has resulted in $2 billion in savings and $140 million in consumer refunds. The fees are additional charges, often not disclosed, added to everything from event tickets to hotel rooms and car rentals. The President today said a new proposed rule from the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, would require businesses to disclose all hidden or misleading fees.
The Federal Trade Commission is proposing a new rule that would ban hidden fees across the economy and require companies to show consumers the all-in pricing up front. And that includes what these fees are for, how much they amount to in full, and whether they are refundable. Research shows that without realizing it, folks can end up paying as much as 20% more because of hidden junk fees than they would have paid if they could see the full price up front and compare it with other options. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's just taking advantage of people. And it makes it harder for honest businesses who are trying to do the right thing to compete with dishonest companies who trick customers into thinking their prices are lower when they in fact are not. Look, if this proposed rule is finalized as proposed, the FTC would have the power to impose financial penalties on companies that don't disclose their full upfront price and secure refunds for customers who have been defrauded by companies charging hidden fees.
President Biden speaking in the White House Rose Garden. He also said the CFPB will take steps to prohibit large banks and credit unions from charging consumers for basic services like checking bank account balances or getting account information needed for applications. Another proposed rule from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would require banking institutions to allow consumers to securely send transaction data to other companies, making it easier for customers to switch banks. This story from The Hill. New York House Republicans will introduce a measure to expel Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, from the legislative body. Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, Republican from New York, announced Wednesday. He wrote on X, "Today I'll be introducing an expulsion resolution to rid the People's House of fraudster George Santos." And he said the resolution will be co-sponsored by fellow first-term Republican members of Congress, all from New York: Nick LaLota, Mike Lawler, Mark Molinaro, Nick Langworthy, and Brandon Williams. The Hill goes on. The announcement comes one day after prosecutors in New York filed a superseding indictment against George Santos, charging him with 10 new criminal charges. He now faces 23 charges in total. The new indictment accuses Congressman Santos of stealing campaign contributors' identities and financial information and of charging their credit cards numerous times without their authorization. There's also this from the Hill article. The announcement marks a shift in position for the 6 New York first-term lawmakers who in May voted with the rest of the GOP conference to refer the matter to the House Ethics Committee rather than vote for Congressman Santos' expulsion. Congressman Santos told CBS News Tuesday night that he looks forward to his trial.
You're all acting like I'm not entitled to due process and innocent until proven guilty. Your next step. I'm nothing. I mean, I'm just going to go defend myself. I have a court date on October 27, and then there's probably going to be something else scheduled for that. I'm entitled to due process. I'm going to go defend myself.
Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, Tuesday night on CBS. Today, reporters asked Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, about the latest indictments.
Can I ask you about the new indictment of your
You know, I haven't yet read it, so I'm going to read it first.
are you still calling on him to resign? Do more charges make it a bigger push here for him to step out of Congress?
Well, yes, but I also think, perhaps more importantly, the fact that a co-conspirator of his has now pled guilty and admitted to committing campaign finance fraud with George Santos is just further proof, confirmation that he committed crimes in order to dupe the voters of his district and get to Congress. And when someone commits such brazen crimes that have now been admitted to in court, it's not just an allegation anymore. It is confirmatory proof that he deceived the voters in order to be here in Congress. So unlike potentially other situations where you might want to let the legal system play out, in this case he has admitted to lying, his co-conspirator has admitted to committing a crime, and it was all done so that he could be here, which means that he is not fit to be here and he should resign immediately.
Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, with reporters today. The Constitution gives the U.S. House the sole right to expel any member of Congress. It takes a 2/3 vote. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. It's free to get the latest stories making headlines emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/word. connect. Have a good night.